Thank you and welcome you. Thank you for doing this. What you're about to embark on, being on a community council, is truly an act of service, and it's an act of service we in the county commission absolutely rely on. You guys represent people that we don't get to see every day, and it's through your conversations with people in your community that we find out what the hot button issues are in Clinton, their newest community council, or in West Valley, or in Sealy, or in the Swan, or in Lolo, or in East Missoula, or Bonner. So we really depend on you, and we expect you guys to have hard conversations with your neighbors and let us know what's going on, and most importantly, how to help. One thing I want to pass on as you're taking these roles is I would encourage you all in the community councils to invite folks from county government to talk about what they do, so that when you make recommendations to us, you'll be making recommendations that we can actually act on. I'm just going to make something up. Maybe somebody will say, the dog barking out here in Clinton is out of control. We need a noise ordinance right now. And you spend a whole bunch of time and energy asking us to do a noise ordinance, and then you find out, well, the county doesn't have any authority to do such a thing. So to prevent something like that, my free advice, and free to ignore if you like, would be invite people like Shane Stack from Public Works, or Chet Krauser from Lands and Communities, or Karen Hughes from Planning out, and just ask them, what do you do all day? How does it work? How does permitting work in the county? How does building permits work? And learn the stuff. And then when you make recommendations to us, it'll be things that we can actually act on. And we will come out anytime you invite, one, two, or three of us. We'll come and listen. All right, with that, I'm going to say thanks and then hand you over to our absolute expert on how local government works. Dan is the authority in the state.
Can I ask one?
Absolutely, yeah.
I've been perusing the website on Leanna Orsolini from Condon, and I can't tell which commissioner goes with which district. Or do all three just share them?
It's a little bit fuzzy. So let me describe it, and Dan can help me out if I get this wrong. When we get elected, we have to be in a certain district to run, but the voting is statewide, or statewide. I'm sorry for saying that. Countywide. Voting's countywide. So when the three of us work, we don't really think too much about our district so much as we think about the whole county, because everybody votes for us. The goal here is that I'm from the west side of the Missoula Valley, that I would have a greater sense of what's going out there than Juanita, who lives up in Greeno most of the time. But our actions affect everybody, and everybody votes. So we behave countywide rather than district-wide. Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to give you to Dan. You're in good hands. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for being here. And I'll just echo the great words that Josh has said, that this whole thing works because you folks are willing to volunteer your time to facilitate conversations around either a particular topic or in your community councils or the communities to help better serve the citizens in the county. So thanks for your service and doing what you do. Today, I'm really impressed that all of you are going to be here for a 6-hour training. So thanks for that too. You think I'm joking. I can go for a full 6 hours without a potty break. And so don't test me on that. But I think we're scheduled for 2 hours. Is that right? All right. I will try to honor the 2-hour slot and get you out of here in a couple hours. Just by way of introduction, who I am, as said, I'm Dan Clark, the director of the Montana State University Local Government Center. And when I got dressed this morning, I didn't realize, because this is the second town I've been in giving trainings, and I wore this shirt and I thought, oh shoot, I'm going to be in Missoula today. I've got kind of a Missoula colory shirt that I wear when I come here, but not today apparently. So this was my Thursday shirt. Is today Thursday? This is my Thursday shirt. It just happens to be blue and gold. Anyway, so the Local Government Center, I'm the director of it. The Local Government Center has been around for about 37 years or so. Our purpose and function is to work with local governments around the state of Montana to build their capacity to better serve the citizens. And we do that through technical assistance, research, and training. So we're out on the road a lot, working with counties. So here today in Missoula County, we're working with county boards, and there might be some city boards in the room. I'm not sure, but I think everybody was invited. So we work with boards and board members, special district boards. So we do training for them. We also work with county commissions and city councils and mayors. We do trainings for mayors. We do trainings for clerks of district court and treasurers, county treasurers and clerk and recorder. So, and then staff, we do a lot of training for staff as well, capacity building, strategic planning, leadership development for staff. So our world is very much in the local government realm. Just this morning, I was in Townsend. In Townsend this morning, working with municipal officials and staff members there. And so I'm here with county folks. So it's good to be traveling the state. And what a gorgeous day. It's really hard, other than the smoke, it's hard to be sitting here in an afternoon like this. So again, good for you. Someone came out of the garden to be here. So that was good for you to do that. Yeah. All right. So let's do quick introductions. There are not many people in the room, so let's do quick introductions. What I'm interested in is, of course, your name. What's your name? What the board is that you're serving on. Is this okay? Am I in trouble? Okay. Oh, okay. We'll do this. So your name and board you're serving on, and how long you've been serving on that board. It gives me a sense of who's in the room and what your board is, so that we can tailor the conversation around kind of the service of the folks in the room. So why don't we start with you, sir?
Greg Tigan with Frenchtown Fire Board.
Okay, fire board.
1 year.
1 year. All right, great.
Leanna Orsolini, and I was just asked to be the note taker for the Condon Community Board, and
Oh.
I'm becoming their Girl Friday.
Yeah, okay. You'll probably have questions about minutes. Yeah.
Oh, my name is Chris. I would represent the Clinton Council, which is just beginning,
Okay.
and that's why I'm here.
So just new then, just
Yep.
started. Great.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm Matt Sanford. I'm on the city's Historic Preservation Commission for a few months now.
Okay.
I'm Steve Major. I'm with the Lolo Community Council, and I get sworn in next month.
Okay.
I'm Sarah Holden. I'm a county employee, so I work with the Lolo Mosquito Board. Hello. And I also am, on a personal note, part of the OLC, Open Lands County Board.
Okay.
And I've been on that for like 4 months.
Okay, good.
I'm Danette, and I'm with the Missoula Parking Commission, and we lead the Missoula Parking Commission Board.
So if I get a ticket, I know who to talk to. Yeah, I did pay my.
I'm
my-
Christy, and you can always call Danette at the Parking Commission, but I am also with the Parking Commission, and we will
Any
be
questions, call Danette.
doing minutes and presenting the board.
Great, good. So kind of staff side? Yeah. All right, so over here.
My name is Bonnie Roberts, and I applied for the Clinton Community Council.
Which is new then, apparently, right? It's just getting.
Well, they
stood up?
haven't even nominated anybody yet.
Okay,
So
so you're all up
I have a
applying.
letter of intent in.
Great, okay.
I'm Frankie Feinstein. I'm also with Clinton, which I guess the election, they just voted to have a council. So yeah, we're just here training in advance.
Good, good.
Hi, Zach Covington, I'm staff with the City Open Space Advisory Council.
Okay.
My name is Crystal Herzog, and I'm with the Historic Preservation Commission, and I've been with that group a couple months now.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Frank Reed. I'm here today as part of Missoula's Affordable Housing Resident Oversight Committee, which isn't even a board, but I'm on some boards too, so can all help.
Yeah, great. All right, that was everybody? All right, I will try to, as we have questions, because oh, golly, there's a bunch of people on Zoom. If they just want to type in what boards they're on, and then if you can just read them out after a few minutes.
Sure, yeah, if you would just want to put in the chat what boards you're sitting on or what who you're representing today, I can read that
Yeah.
out. Thank you.
Yeah, it's helpful for me because I'll often use examples because we're going to pick on fire districts today. So it's nice to have a representative from a fire district in the house. So just saddle up. It's going to be uncomfortable for you. Yeah. All right. So yeah, if you don't like my humor, it's going to be like this for the next 2 hours. So that's how it's going to roll. What I like to do is, you notice there's no PowerPoint presentation. You're welcome. If I showed up with a PowerPoint, that's assuming that I know exactly what you want to talk about, and I don't roll that way. So what I want to do is ask you, what is it that you want to make sure? We've got an hour and 50 minutes, 45 minutes to talk. What do you want to make sure we cover today? What topics? Some of you are just new to this world. You may not even know what you don't know. You don't even know what you should be asking. So we can certainly fill in the gaps there. But is there something you want to make sure we cover before the end of the day? Whether it's how do we notice meetings? How do we take care of minutes? What do minutes look like? What constitutes a meeting? What's a quorum? When do we, can we communicate via email? What is the code of ethics? Anything to do with governance in board service. Let's see if we can make a list, and that will serve as our agenda for today, and that will guide our discussion. So I want to make sure we're meeting your needs in the next 2 hours. So if anybody's got something you want to throw up, we'll just start making a list. Does anybody have anything you want to throw up? Put up on the list. Yeah. So let's talk about then with that, let's say open meetings. What constitutes a meeting? What's an open meeting? And what is the criteria required to have a legal meeting as a board? And then conversely, then how do we create illegal meetings? Those are easy to do something illegally, that's right. So we want to make sure we're not doing that and that we're following the law, right? So we can certainly, the handouts that I've provided you, I've also decided not to provide a lot of narrative and interpretation of the law, but I have cut and pasted the Montana statutes for us to look at, and then we'll read through what does the law say, and we can discuss that. How do we apply that in our local jurisdiction? So how do we take and convert that into practice? So it's great to read a bunch of legalese, but then what does it look like when we're doing it at home? So yeah.
I'm comfortable with meeting minutes after I read the loose criteria in our bylaws and in the handbook. I developed some lessons for
Excellent.
What I'm more concerned about is informal discussion between board members and how you handle that, because that happens a lot in small communities, and also enforcement of the bylaws and the handbook, because what happens if a board member doesn't take orientation within a year? Who enforces this? And who enforces, like, how many absences can a board member have before, and are there any consequences?
Yeah. So when we get there, you got a list, but when we get to that discussion, then let's go through some of those and try to talk about that. Yeah. Yeah. You'll likely be frustrated with the outcome of that, but yeah, we can certainly address that. There's ways in which you can kind of tighten that up, but yeah, let's chat about that when it comes to that, when we get to that part. What else? And which is your board again? It was the mosquito, yeah. Yep. Okay. So mosquito open land, so strategic planning, the role of planning within a board. Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah.
Can I tag on to
Yeah.
that, the new government website, as apparently our board went off, and now the laws have changed, and I think I found the right government website that wants everyone to fill out a questionnaire to see. But I don't know, it's like they're developing a new process. I'd like some clarification.
Be disappointed with me on that one. Yeah. So it might be a state went, yeah. And so I know there's been a lot of changes this year. They're trying to sort through. So legislative services trying to sort through all these bills and then convert them into state code. And then it'll likely come out in October. We'll have the actual wording. Most laws that are adopted, unless said otherwise in the law when it's passed, go into effect October 1st. And that gives legislative services that much time to redo the Montana Code Annotated and make those changes in the state law. And then they'll come up with a new set of state laws. So, but quick answer, but we can kind of kick that around too. Anything else? Yeah. Okay, great. Good. So conflict of interest, recusing yourself, when is that appropriate? Yeah. Okay.
I've got two items together, but one of them, one question would be with enforcement, if there was a situation that a board or board members were blatantly being bad, is there a oversee committee somewhere in the state that that handles that?
There is new legislation that's just passed this last session that addresses this a little bit. So let's talk about that, and how we can increase the accountability.
Okay, my other question is pretty specific.
Okay.
What kind of leeway or what kind of assistance can a board and or the administrative staff of the special district, can they assist a candidate, whether it's a new candidate or somebody up for re-election with any part of their campaign, filling out the paperwork, endorsing a candidate?
So let's talk about that. We've got a handout that we can refer you to, and you can read through what that says around the role, and really what it comes down to is using public time and resources for campaigning. So if you can, short answer is if you can separate yourself and say, I'm not acting as a fire district board member, but I am acting as Dave, Joe, Bob, what was your name?
Greg.
Greg, it's close. Not close, but close. So yeah, so I'm acting as Greg here, and I'm not evoking my title. I'm not evoking, or I'm not using the copy machine at the fire hall to make copies for leaflets, right? Public property is being used to campaign. So we can show you references where to see what the law says on that. Yeah. So yeah, good stuff. I'll come back to it. They've got some great language that we can refer to. Yeah. Anything else? We're getting close to filling up a whole sheet of paper. Oh my gosh, is there comments? So what have we got online? Are they coming up with stuff? Oh, and do you want to read out some of the list of?
Yeah, let me scroll back up here and read through some of these. So we have Bonner, Milltown Community Council, Missoula Consolidated Planning Board, Lolo Community Council, East Missoula Community Council. Sorry, scroll down here. We have Tom Green Park. We have Missoula Police Commission. Someone's been there for 9 years. The JEDI Advisory Board, that they're trying to work for that. And then that's most of the folks that we've gotten online. I'm sure I missed some folks, but we have lots of different folks on here from lots of different entities. We have Affordable Housing Oversight Committee, Open Lands Committee. We have staff support for the Planning Board, Zoning Board of Adjustment. We have some Clinton Community Council folks on here. More Lolo, Missoula Community Access Television Advisory Board, Lower Rattlesnake Neighborhood Leadership Team, Lewis and Clark Neighborhood Council. I don't know if I'm going to get everybody, and a couple other Lolo Community Council.
We've got more people online than we do in the room. Yeah, well, I always love coming here because you got such a diverse amount of boards. So between the city and county, you guys like to make boards. It's like you're governing intensive, which is good to see, right? So, when you think about it, one of the purposes, if you got 3 county commissioners, they can't possibly be experts or competent in all that a county is responsible for. It's difficult to do that, right? From parking to to affordable housing to I don't know, fire protection. So what we have created in this state and across the country is this idea of boards, that we're going to take a group of people, then they're going to drill down on a specific interest that they come to the table. I'm interested in this. I'm going to bring my energy to that and have them facilitate the conversation in the community. And that then bubbles up as an advisory capacity to the elected officials to make decisions on. So it's a way in which they can get that expert input and advice from people around the community in all these varied areas of interest and of public concern. And so that's what I like about Missoula and Missoula County, the city and county, is you're a very vocal community. People are always talking about stuff. And so there's never a shortage of coming together and communicating. And so as things bubble up, we say, hey, maybe we need to put a little bit of a spotlight on this. Let's create a board and a structure on this and facilitate a conversation that is encompassing the whole community. And then what can we do as the county commission to address that by way of policy or something? You want me to take that from you? All right. So let's start ticking some of these things off. Governing philosophy, we'll start there. Let's just ask the question just for some context. A lot of what we'll talk about today will be based on this idea of government and why government exists. So as you think about in your mind, why do we create government? What is its purpose? We've been doing it for thousands of years all across the world and every culture. We've had a need to create government. Why is that? Okay, we want order, we need some regulations, we need something to provide guidance for our community. Why else? Safety, public safety, infrastructure. You think about it, big picture, we create government to do things collectively we can't do individually. Right? So there's certain things that says it doesn't make sense for this to do individually. Why don't we pool our resources together and do it collectively? Like water. It doesn't make sense for all of us to have a little well in our backyard, and a little pump that we're pumping water into our house that way. That doesn't make sense, but it makes sense for us to all as neighbors come together and say, let's put in a water system. Let's have one clean source of water. We'll pipe it into everybody's house. Same with sewer, right? We all don't want to have a pit toilet in our backyard, right? So let's pool our resources together. We'll put in a sewer system, and we'll treat that effluent, and we'll discharge it. We'll have some thought about that. Same with roads and sidewalks and parks. There's these things that make sense for us to come together as a community and say, these things we want to have happen. And we pool our resources in the form of what? What do we call it when we pool our resources? Financial resources. Taxes. You said that without spitting. I'm just spitting your taxes. But if you think about it, that's the role of taxes, right? We tax ourselves to provide these services. Our tax dollars goes to build roads and sidewalks and to maintain the parks and the quality, some of those quality of life things that we can't just go to Walmart and buy, right? You can't go to Walmart and get good road service. You can't go to Walmart and buy water service, right? So that's where that idea of governing. So now we've pooled our resources together. We're providing these essential services we can't get anywhere else. And then the people that run that are folks that we elect from our local community. Right, so we're going to elect local folks and say, we want you to make decisions on our behalf, but we don't abdicate our sovereignty to you. We still want to be part of the process. You're working on our behalf. So that water system, sewer system, road system, park system, open lands, all those things, that's the treating mosquitoes, right? There's a need for us. And so rather than everybody out there spraying DDT in their backyard, which we don't do that anymore, hopefully, that we're saying, look, let's collectively manage it. Because if you spend a whole lot of energy trying to manage the mosquitoes in your backyard and you do nothing as a neighbor, well, that doesn't make sense, right? I'm not. So if we all leverage that effort, we can have an impact. So we elect local folks, and then those local folks, so Clinton, right? Our Clinton contingent here, you're all vying to say, hey, I want to be on that community council. What you're really vying for is I want to be able to facilitate a conversation in our community about what's important to us. And how do I represent this as a unified body to the county commission, who ultimately has the authority to make the decisions for us. But we can be here in the local community facilitating that conversation. I often think of what we're doing is there's a role we play as elected officials or appointed officials or on our board, is we are trying to maintain balance, and we act as the fulcrum we try to find that balance in our communities. And so as we facilitate that conversation, what we're trying to do is trying to find where is that sweet spot where we have found balance in our community. Think of urban chickens as an example. I would imagine you are allowing urban chickens in Missoula or in the, so urban chickens around the state's always a hot topic. I don't understand, but we get all wound up about urban chickens, right? So 50, 60 years ago, when people moved from the country into the city, they said, look, keep your farm animals at home. Keep your goats and your chickens and your horses and your goats, all that, your sheep, pigs, keep them all out in the country. In town, we're not having no farm animals. Well, 10 years ago, people started realizing, well, why can't we have chickens? Chickens are clean, they go through their rationale. So what happens is people show up at a city council meeting saying, hey, we want you to reconsider that ordinance that outlaws chickens because we think there should be no reason why we can't have chickens in town. And here are the benefits of having chickens in our community. And so the next meeting, you're going to have all the chicken haters show up saying, don't you dare bring chickens back because they're terrible, awful, flea infested, whatever. So now we have an imbalance in our community. And that elected body then is going to facilitate the conversation to try to find where is the balance in this issue of urban chickens. And if they decide, okay, we want to have chickens, right? Chickens will have chickens. Now the question is, how many chickens? Will we allow roosters? Are we going to require a chicken hutch? Are we going to inspect the chicken hutch? Are we going to have a permit? And if so, are we going to charge for the permit? Oh, we can dig deep on this. And all that is trying to figure out how do we create an ordinance that allows chickens in our community? What is that going to look like? So there's baked in accountability and expectations so everybody knows what the rules are. We pass the ordinance, and then 2 families apply for chickens. That's usually how it happens. We've had one town, oh my gosh, they had to have like 6 meetings in the high school gym. 100 people show up arguing about chickens. They ended up putting on the ballot, and people got so wound up they did campaigning. They had yard signs: pluck yes for chickens, cluck no for chickens. So this is up on the High Line. There's not much to do in the wintertime. So this was their thing, was to have this chicken debate. And it ends up that they vote for it, and then only 2 people wanted to get the application to get the chickens. So the city staff goes around and asks some of these folks that were really adamant for the chickens and said, well, you were so vocal, but you don't have a permit. What's the deal? And they said, I don't want chickens. But I wanted those people that wanted chickens to have the ability to have chickens. And that's the beauty of all this is where we're facilitating this conversation in the public square. We come together and we deliberate and we negotiate and mediate our differences. And you're at that fulcrum trying to find out how do we do that. So think of yourself, right? Back to that governing philosophy. What is my philosophy and how do I approach this? Am I going to approach my role on this board or this community council, assuming that I'm the smartest person in the community? That's why they voted for me, because I'm the super smart one. And so I don't even need your opinion because I already know the answers. That's the thing. You could do that. Or do you want to come to the position saying, all right, I may not know the answer, and what I think maybe isn't that important. What's more important is, what do all you want? And how do I create the environment and the space for us to have the conversation to find that sweet spot where we say, okay, we've found the best for the most people in the community. Years ago, I was elected mayor of a small town in Montana, and I had an opportunity to go to DC to talk with, at the time, Conrad Burns. Remember old Conrad Burns? And we went there to talk about an issue that was a challenge in our community. We couldn't move forward with a vision of our future because this federal issue was in our way. If the federal government decided to do one thing, it would completely change our future trajectory. Or if they chose to do a different thing, our future would be different. And here we were as a community trying to plan out, map out our future. Where are we going? What is our potential as a community? But we couldn't make a decision because our future was unclear because the federal government was unwilling to make a decision. So we went back to Conrad Burns and we said, hey, Senator Burns, as well as Tester at the time. I want to say Rehberg was the other one. And we're asking him to say, look, we just need your help. This is something we can't do, but our future is dependent upon what you do. And Senator Burns said, you know what? He said, boys, I don't agree with what you're doing here. Personally, I don't think that what you're advocating for is I'm personally supportive of it. But if this is what you need to move forward, I'm your guy to move that forward. If that's what you want to have happen, despite what I want, I will carry the water for you. I'm your man in Washington. I will help you get this resolved so you can move forward. And I like the fact that it helped me develop my governing philosophy because he understood it wasn't about what Conrad Burns wants and just say, hey, to screw all you in Montana, I'm the smartest guy in the state and I'm going to make decisions that I think is best for the state. Rather, he said, it's not about me. It's about what do you want? And if this is what your community wants, then I'm the only person me and the other three are here to make that happen. So I thought that again was this governing philosophy that I thought was very helpful in helping me understand that it's not about me. I'm facilitated. I don't care what, I'm Switzerland about chickens, except for roosters. I've got an opinion about that. But that's part of the conversation that we're going to try to facilitate and find that sweet spot. All right, does that make sense? So with that in mind, it might make sense as we have the conversation and start answering some of these questions, you start realizing, oh, that's why this process seems so cumbersome and inconvenient for me as a board member. But if I realize it's not about me, it's about the public that I'm serving. And it's convenient for them. So anytime if you're realizing as a board member, oh, let's do this because it'll be far more convenient for me, it's likely illegal. Just say, if it's easy for you, it's probably not the right process, right? Because it's not designed for your convenience or for your ease, because it's all about how do we facilitate this for the public? How do we bring them together? How do we create that space in the community square to have that conversation? And that's not about being convenient for you. That's a little thing. It's like, oh, this is going to be easy if we just do this. Oh, why don't we just talk about this over email? That's going to be a lot more easy than having this big old meeting and all these people yelling at us. Well, yeah, then that's not going to work. And we'll talk more about that. All right, is this making sense? All right. Let's start in your packet. For those, I'm hoping I'm online. What do we have the packet as it's in here?
Yeah.
Or is it all individual pages?
It's left side, right.
Perfect. So let's start with the left side packet. Everything that we're doing here in local governments, all the authority and power that we have in the state is derived from our Montana Constitution. So the Montana Constitution really creates that high altitude document that articulates as a state, here's the structure and function and purpose of government. This is how it's organized. This is how the powers that the government has and the responsibilities it has and the duties of government. And it talks about the rights of citizens. Okay, so that's all spelled out in the Constitution. So we have the Montana Constitution. Then once that is adopted by and ratified by the public, the citizens all voted back in 1972 saying, yep, we like that Constitution. It was written by the delegation. Once that is ratified, then it goes to the Montana legislature. And what they do is they create the Montana Code Annotated, the MCA. That's the state law. So what they're doing is they're taking this high altitude document, it's 72 pages long in a pamphlet that fits in my back pocket, right? So we can't govern an entire state and all the local government with a 72-page document. So the legislature says, all right, we're going to operationalize it to a level. They're going to take it from that 50,000-foot view down to about 10,000 foot. And they're going to say, okay, you have certain powers and authorities granted to you by the Constitution. This is the framework that you can operate in. So they give us that structure. Then on the local level, we create local policies. Policies. So the legislature takes the operationalize the Constitution to a certain point, and then you pick up the slack and say, okay, now, for example, all fire districts across the state have to operate a certain way. Then when you create your local policies, your local fire district can say, all right, in our district, what's the name of your district? Frenchtown. So the Frenchtown Fire District is going to operationalize and do these things in our district, which may be different than the Sydney Rural Fire District in Sydney, Montana, right? They might have a whole different structure, all within the same framework, They're all operating under the same authority, but how they choose to implement that and exercise that authority may look a little bit different. And that's what's lovely about our Constitution, the way our state operates, is we allow at the local level for us to have that flexibility within the authority framework that is provided to us by the law. You got a lot of flex in there. So you can flex that how it works for you in Frenchtown, and the folks down, what's another, the Alberton Fire District might flex it a different way. Is that making sense? So that's all reflected in your local policies. Now, sometimes, am I going too fast? Breathe, Dan. This is so exciting. Sometimes the legislature uses language that's ambiguous. It's not quite clear what they mean. And so as you're trying to write your local policies, and you want to make sure that your policies are consistent with the law and are within the framework that you're supposed to be operating in, but the language is unclear and you don't know how to write that policy to make sure that you're consistent with the law and not violating the law. So in order to get clarity for you to make decisions for your local policies around ambiguous language in the law, you can go and ask the Montana Attorney General and ask the Attorney General and say, here, the language in the law is unclear. We don't know how to act. So can you clarify for us what the law means? And then the Attorney General will render an opinion. And that opinion from the Attorney General then stands as law in the state of Montana until either the legislature clarifies the law through the legislative process, or someone sues and it goes through to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court makes a decision that may clarify the law. So sometimes it may be this, and this is how we access the third branch of government, or the judicial branch of government, where it's unclear what to do. So in order to get clarity, we'll just step into this space and we'll try it. And if you don't like what we're doing, you can sue us. And we say, great, let's get clarity. Let's go to the court and find out. And we may be slapped back and say, yep, you're exercising authority you don't have, or no, you're in the proper space. And it brings everybody, provides clarity for everybody. Is that making sense? So that's kind of a way you can look at this. So there's a lot of things that we do in the state of Montana that go through this flow. We will read things here in the law, and we'll even see the ambiguous language, and then we'll access what does the Attorney General say that helps you create your local policy. So with that, let's turn in your packet there, page L1, the top of the page. That's the Declaration of Rights, Article 2 of our Constitution, sections 8, 9, and 10. I think it's 8, 9, and 10. The right to know, the right to participate, and the right of privacy. And that is written as just single sentences that defines the rights of the citizens of Montana. So we have 3 sentences that then turn into 4 pages of law that clarifies how on the local level are we going to operationalize these 3 constitutional rights. So the legislature meets and says, all right, we have a right to participate. So how are we going to give you the clarity and the direction on the local level to make sure that you're giving the public the opportunity to participate in your decision-making process? So the 3 things that they say, let's read those really quick. And this, again, gives you that big picture philosophy. When we start saying, oh, we start drilling down into specifics that you must do for meetings. Well, the reason why is because the Constitution has said there is rights that the public has, and in order to honor those rights, you need to structure your meetings in a certain way. Or there's certain things you can't do because that would be a violation of both the law and the Constitution. And we don't want to violate the citizens' rights. That's not good. So we don't want to do that. So we want to make sure we're toeing the line and are in our lane. So the right to participate, the public has a right to expect governmental agencies to afford such reasonable opportunity for citizen participation in the operation of the agency prior to final decision as may be provided by law. So legislatures, you need to create laws that ensures the public has a right to participate in the process of creating whatever decision before you make that final decision. Think about where we were as a state prior to 1972 when we adopted our last constitution. Where was the seat of power prior to 1972 in Montana? You can say it, you won't offend me. Starts with a B, not an H, not Helena. Further south, about 60 miles. Butte, well, you'd think Bozeman, they'd like to be in charge, but no, it was Butte, right? There's a lot of power coming out of Butte, and they had a tremendous amount of influence in the state politics to where the people of the state felt like they were out of the loop. They couldn't really influence the outcome because the power was really centralized in Butte. So when we had our 1972 Constitution, that pendulum swung way over to the other end, saying, no, we're making sure the power rests with the people. Therefore, the public has a right to participate. The government has to ensure their ability to engage and participate in the decision-making process. The next one says the right to know. No person shall be deprived of the right to examine documents. So any document that you produce, the public has a right to examine that. Transparency, big time, right? We want to see the sausage being made. We want to see all the documentation that informs you in that decision-making process. So examine documents and to observe the deliberations of all public bodies. So the right to see the sausage being made. We want to observe that deliberation. So this is what is informing our open meeting laws in the state of Montana. And we'll talk about that in a minute here. And it's subdivision, except in which the case of individual, let's say, well, except in cases which the demand of individual privacy clearly exceeds the merits of public disclosure. So here again is an interesting dilemma. We have a right to know, the public has a right to know what the government's doing. But as an individual, you have a right to privacy. Sometimes there may be a situation where those two things come in conflict. So you have this right to know and right to privacy. For example, does the county possess records that would be considered private? Yes, the county's in possession of records that would be considered private, say personnel records. You as a citizen have a right to examine documents. So you can trot into the county courthouse and say, I would like to see Chris's personnel file. I want to see those documents. I have a right to examine documents. I want to see them. Well, does Chris have an expectation of privacy for his employment with the county? Well, maybe. So now we are stuck in trying to balance, is there an expectation of privacy? His constitutional right to privacy, does that exceed the public's right to know? And the county has to balance whose constitutional right are we going to violate? Are we going to violate Chris's privacy right and release his personnel document? Or are we going to violate your right to know in honor of his right to privacy? So there's some interesting dilemmas that are created within our Constitution that we have to be very thoughtful about doing it. And it's not a single yes, no answer. Does that make sense? It's, in this case, yeah, I would say, and I would argue that Chris would have an expectation of privacy. Now, if we gave Chris a gun and a badge and said, you can violate people's constitutional right up into the point of death as a law enforcement officer, do you think he'd have the same expectation of privacy? Probably not. Because we're giving an awesome amount of authority to Chris as a police officer to exercise extreme judgment in how he performs the duties of his job. And so if he demonstrates a lack of judgment, that may cause the public to say, we want to know who that is. And I'm referring to an example in Billings a few years back. I don't know if you saw this in the news, but there was a situation where an employee at the city was stealing drugs from the evidence locker and selling it. And anyway, so they're investigating this crime. And through the investigation, they came upon that she had been having inappropriate relationships with at least 3 police officers while on duty in the public facilities. You know, that's not a good thing. Violation of all sorts of policies. So these officers were disciplined. Somehow it was leaked to the newspaper that say, hey, there's 3 officers that got tied up into this whole thing and they were acting kind of inappropriate. So now the press comes knocking on the door of the city of Billings and saying, hey, we want to know who these officers are. And the city's like, okay, but we're not sure where that line is, right? We're trying to find that balance, but we're not sure where the line is. We know that officers have less of an expectation of privacy because the level of public trust that we place in these officers to exercise good judgment. We're not sure if this qualifies or not. So rather than saying we're going to violate the public's right to know and say no, or violating these officers' rights inappropriately by releasing the information, they went to the court and asked the judge, say, You help us decide. You have judicial immunity. You can't get sued. We can if we make the wrong decision. If you make the decision, that's the decision. Whatever it is, that's the right decision. What did the judge say? Anybody remember? The judge said release the information. So in that case, the personnel information was released to the public. So we know who those officers are, primarily because of the status of the trust that the public places in those officers to exercise good judgment. Same town, different scenario, 3 dudes work in the IT department, the basement of the city hall, looking at dirty pictures, as dudes do in basements. So now that gets leaked out. So they somehow have a bad leak at the city. That gets leaked out to the newspaper. So the newspaper comes trotting down and say, hey, we want to know who those IT guys are that were violating your policy. We want to know who they are. And they said, in a very, very nice way, they said, no, go pound sand. We're not releasing that information. There's not an expectation for the public to know that. We're going to honor the expectation of privacy or the right to privacy in this situation. The courts agreed. They went to court and the court said, no, that would be considered private. Because of their position of trust is so low as a public official, we don't, or as a public employee, the public doesn't have a right to know who those individuals are. Now, if there's only 3 in the department, it's pretty easy. Go on the website and figure it out. But, so that makes sense. Deep dive, but so those are the 3 constitutional provisions that we want to talk about. 3 simple sentences, but turns into many pages of law that helps us understand that. You then want to create a local policy that says, because it says we need to, the public has a right to expect governmental agencies to afford reasonable opportunity. You want to give reasonable opportunity for the public to participate in your meetings. Well, what's reasonable opportunity? I don't know. What does the legislature say? So look down at the page there at the bottom of L1, 2-3-103, titled Public Participation. It says there, each agency shall develop procedures for permitting and encouraging the public to participate in the agency's decisions that are of significant interest to the public. So you need to develop procedures or local policies. So that's saying there's a state law that says your board needs to create local policies that defines, what did it say? That for permitting and encouraging the public to participate. So think about that. That's more greater expectation than just telling the people when and where we're meeting, but also an expectation to encourage the public to participate in your process. Right? So be thinking about that as a board. What are we doing to do that's in addition to just posting out on the door saying we're going to meet Tuesday night at 6 o'clock to talk about fire stuff, right? What else are we doing to encourage their participation? The next sentence says the procedures must ensure adequate notice and assist public participation before final agency action is taken of significant interest. So assist, here again, not only encourage participation, it says it again in the next sentence. You need to assist the public in participating. All right, so those 2 things we want to highlight. The next thing that I want to highlight is this adequate notice idea. So the law says you need to create or give adequate notice to the public. Well, if I'm writing my local policy, what does that mean? How do I know I'm in compliance with the idea of adequate notice? Because looking at you, 4 hours, tweet it out, I'm there. That's adequate for me. Give me 4 hours, tweet it, I'm okay. You, give me 2 weeks, a letter in the mail, and bring a van by to pick me up, right? So that would be adequate for you. 2 weeks for you, it'd be 4 hours. If I'm writing my policy, who do I write it to? I don't know. And I don't want to, if I write it for 4 hours, I don't want to violate your rights if I don't know where the line is. So point being is a bunch of city and county attorneys struggling with this, trying to figure out how do we write a clear, coherent policy with clear expectations where we know when we're in bounds or out of bounds. They don't know where the bounds are. And so they go to the Attorney General and say, can you give us an opinion and interpret the law where it says adequate notice? And what did the Attorney General say? Anybody know? How many hours? Attorney General said 48 hours. That's an 8. 48 hours would be considered sufficient notice prior to contemplated action of any board, commission, bureau, or whatever. So you need, as you're writing your bylaws, like so Clinton, you're going to be creating a brand new community council. One of the first things you're going to do is, I don't know, does the county have a boilerplate bylaws for? So you'll be adopting the boilerplate bylaws for the county, and in those bylaws, it likely says you need to at least provide 48 hours notice before you have your meeting. So the public knows when and where you're meeting, and they can decide whether they want to participate and show up and engage in that conversation. So that's the standard now. Ambiguous language by the legislature is clarified by the Attorney General. There's a ton of Attorney General opinions and Supreme Court case notes to help us better understand those 4 pages of open meetings and citizen participation laws. So we have 4 pages, but there's a lot more clarification that comes out of it. So, any questions so far? All right, so here's another question for you. Let's get a new piece of paper. Oh my gosh. All right, now let's do new colors. This is where I get my arts and crafts in, right on flip charts. Legal meeting. What constitutes a legal meeting? There are 6 criteria that you need to meet in order to have a legal meeting. If you miss one of those criteria, is it still a legal meeting? No, right? So then it no longer meets the standard for a legal meeting. So you want to make sure all 6 of these things are met to have a legal meeting. So, any guesses? What are some of the things that must happen in order to have a legal meeting? Adequate notice, all right? So we want to have notice. What else? A quorum. An agenda. Yeah, thank you. Minutes. What were we just talking about that you need to provide? Oh, notice for the public to provide comment on anything of significant interest to the public. So public comment. And the last, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so the last one, let's look at L3, page L3 in your packet. My goodness, we're an hour into this. Isn't this fun? An hour has just flown by. All right, so L3, we want to look at the top third, 2-3-202. This is where the legislature has defined what a meeting is. And so a meeting is the convening of a quorum, so we've got that on our list, of the constituent members of a public agency, whether corporal or by means of electronic equipment. So whether corporal, what does that mean when they say corporal? In person, right? So whether you're in person or connected electronically by electronic equipment. So we'll come back to that electronic equipment here in a minute. And it goes on to say to hear, what does it say? Hear? What else? Discuss or act. Now, as I made that list there, I made a big deal about the word or. Why did I make a big deal about or? Hear, discuss, or act. Yeah, any one of the 3. If it said and, you'd have to do all 3 to make a meeting. But the legislature chose the word or, which means if you have a quorum that you're hearing or discussing or acting on something within your jurisdiction, you're having a meeting. And if that's happening, then there needs to be notice, an agenda, minutes, and the public comment. So the other critical thing that they said in that law is if you're connected either in person or electronically. So if you're talking on the phone, you're talking on a Zoom, and there's a quorum of you talking and chatting about something within your jurisdiction or hearing from someone, you're having a meeting. It's not convenient, is it? You can get a lot of stuff done on email, but that's not the point. The public has a right to observe the deliberations and the sausage making. So if you're having an email dialogue going on in between your meetings, the public can't observe that. We don't have the technology for them to observe and participate in that discussion. So you're creating the seasoning of the sausage during that process, and then you come out on that meeting and roll it all out. It's like, well, wait a minute. We've been cut out. It seems like you've already had this conversation. You've come to a conclusion, and we're just window dressing now. We have been cut out of that process. And the whole idea is we're facilitating for you, right? So we want you to be part of the process. We need to be bringing you along as the public through that process. I saw a hand. Oh, we're there, brother. Yep.
Minutes. Oh, sorry about
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
Yeah, sorry, just to repeat real quick. We talked about if you have a couple of members of a committee, for example, or a council that meet outside of the meeting time and it's not a full quorum, where's the dividing line there? And I think the city errs on the side of being safe. So if there's more than two potentially, then maybe we need to have minutes and staff and everything else. So I just wanted to hear comments on that.
Not a bad plan, right? It's so there's part of it is what does the law say, right? So we make sure we're complying with the law, right? But by having the policy saying, look, if a couple of you are getting together, how big's the board? How many people on the board? 12, and 2 show up. Okay, that's a big standard. So then the expectation is if there's 12 people, what constitutes a quorum if there's a 12-member board? What makes a quorum? 7. So it's a majority. So half plus 1 makes your quorum. But the idea is if we're getting people together and we're talking about something, that's informing the board. We're looking or reviewing a site that's informing the board. And so noticing that meeting or having the public participate and see that would be belt and suspenders. You are making sure that we're honoring the process and deferring to public participation. Yeah, it's that standard is in excess of what the law requires, but it's a good strategy thinking, no, we're here for the public. So we want to make sure that we're recording whatever is going into that conversation. Yeah. Other questions? It's helpful. So we're not meeting in someone's basement. Oh. And you notice the meetings that we're meeting in the deli department at the grocery store?
Yeah, we don't.
Okay. Yeah. 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 So the law here doesn't address it. So it comes back to that philosophy, right? How do we want to make our meetings inviting to the public? Are we creating barriers for people's participation? So those are some of the things. So it doesn't specifically say you can only hold your meetings in a ADA accessible public facility. They don't go that far. They're saying, look, you've got to figure it out. Because I'll tell you, some places in our rural communities, they don't have any place that's ADA accessible, right? That might be the city hall, which is an old, well, I've been in some scary city halls. It's like, wow, you can spend a little money here. But yeah, so you've got to decide where you want to have your meetings. And so what you'll do in your local policy is saying, we are going to be meeting every first Thursday of every month at the deli, at the grocery store from 10 to noon on those days. And we're going to notice to the public where that is on our website. Where do you see it at? Cork board of the post office. So you've identified where your meetings are going to be so that here's the thing to think about. People don't govern, policies govern. people come and go. Policies stay behind. So when you write that local policy, you're defining not just for today, but for well into the future, where we are meeting and how we're conducting the people's business. So as this particular board right now migrates off and you get new people, you're always going to find the notice on the cork board of the post office, because that's what the policy says. Get a new board and we're going to follow the policies of the old board until such time that that board chooses to change it. So maybe in the future they say, we're going to move our meetings, our official meeting location from the deli at the grocery store to the fire hall, the training room, right? We're going to move it to the fire hall training room because they've got better facilities and it's more appropriate for us to be having these public discussions and facilitating public comment. So some of those things you want to think about. How is the public going to observe our deliberations? And do we have an inviting location where the public can, in this space, view and participate in that process?
We have no access to.
Can you repeat the question?
So they have no
Dan, for
access
our
to
online
electronic,
audience?
to have people connect electronically. Yeah, I'm really bad at this. Try to put that in my pocket. So yeah, so you might want to consider then, is there a better way in which we can meet the needs of the people in our community that we're serving and meet them where they're at rather than finding it's probably super convenient for you. Remember what I said earlier about convenience? It's not about you. So you're trying to, so really, how do we make this convenient for the public? And yeah, there's nothing that says you can't have it at church, but if people are unwilling to step through the threshold of another denomination, they think they will literally melt, like on Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right? That's a thing for people. And then you're excluding them and their ability to participate in a public process. Yeah. So it's nothing that says you can't, but you got to be thinking about how do we make it more inviting and remove barriers. Yeah. Good question though.
So if the board decides to have a committee or an ad hoc group, then is it a good idea not to have a quorum of the board on this committee or ad hoc group? Because then it would be like having a public meeting.
It won't matter because that committee you create is another public entity that needs to follow the same laws. Yeah, so whether it's and I'm just not making that up. So look down on page L3, the next section of the law, 23203, the number 1, it says all meetings of public governmental bodies, boards, bureaus, commissions, agencies of the state, or any political subdivision, i.e. all y'all. I hang out in North Carolina a lot, so I can now say that. All y'all. So you're a subdivision of state government, and your meetings must be open to the public. So we start out there, all of our meetings are open to the public. Drop down to number 6. Any committee or subcommittee appointed by the public body described in subsection 2 for the purpose of conducting business that is within the jurisdiction of the agency is subject to the requirements of this section. So it's not a way to, sometimes boards or commissions will say, oh, we want to have this conversation, but it's kind of cumbersome and awkward, or we don't want to have it really, there's a lot of examples in Missoula that's dealt with this, so we're going to appoint this little board. You go off and talk about it, figure it all out, and then bring it back to us and we'll make the decision. There was a school board a while back in Missoula County, and I think it was the city, the Missoula School Board, that they had a subcommittee that was created to evaluate the closure of a school. What school are we going to close in the valley? Do you think that's of a significant interest to the public? The public thought so too. So this committee, to avoid all the scrutiny, who wants to have that conversation? Because you're gonna have a whole line of people yelling, not my school, not my, the NIMBY folks, right? And legitimately so. And so they set up a whole spreadsheet with criteria and they debated all this and they went through this sophisticated process of identifying that's the school we're gonna close. All done without public notice. Then they brought it forward to the school board saying, we figured it all out. Here's the school that we suggest you close. And the public now learns of this for the first time. So what did they do? They went here and said, can they do that? Then the court said no. They created a subdivision of government that was deliberating on a public issue. So as the body created them to do with a public purpose, and that board or that group that you create, that subcommittee, needs to follow the open meeting laws. So they had to reject that suggestion, that recommendation, and start the process all over again, all in the daylight. That's really the remedy, right? Oh, we screwed up. Well, then just start the process over again, but do it open. There's an airport board not far from here, actually it's probably 60 miles south of here. I won't tell you where, but it was Ravalli County. Oh, this is being recorded. But an airport board a while back received this big FAA grant. And the airport board is like, you know, we got deadlines, we got to get this done. So they just hunkered down in their basements and their computers and just emailing back and forth. And they created this wonderful plan, this master plan for the airport facility. But it was all done, really super convenient, really quick, got it done, but it was not done in an open process. And so then they started putting flyers around town saying, we're going to release our plan, have a big meeting where everybody can come out and see what we're planning to do. And the county attorney said, wait. I don't remember seeing any other notices for the planning process. Did you conduct this in an open process? And they said, no, it's too much of a hassle. They said, well, guess what? You got to start the process all over again. So they had and here's the ironic thing. Had they noticed at all those meetings and had them in a public place and allowed the public to participate, do you think anyone would have showed up? Probably not. But since they didn't have it open, and do you think people will be, oh, now suddenly I'm interested in what's going on at the airport because you are making decisions without me part of this. I have a right, and they're going to exercise that right. So I just find it very ironic. Question.
This goes back to that significant act.
Yep. Significant interest of the public.
Yes. Yeah. So can you give a definition on what's a significant? I mean, that sounds pretty
ambiguous.
Ambiguous.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And here's the key about the significant interest of the public. The public decides what that is. And so the thing is, so we don't know. It's hard for us to say. So here's the other thing I'll say is, that's what a city in the state of Montana ended up paying out to a person because they did not allow that person to comment on this agenda item before they took final action on it, because the city thought that that was an administrative decision and that was not of significant interest to the public. And the woman then got up to make public comment after they made the final action on that. And bad things happened. She got dragged out and arrested. She gets a good attorney. The attorney says, okay, tell me what happened. Give me the timeline. Said, well, the city council convened their meeting. They can pass their consent agenda. In that consent agenda was the approval of this contract. And then I got up to speak at public comment. And what I wanted to talk about was the thing that they just decided. And the city thought, oh, we didn't think anybody cared. And it's an administrative thing, they thought, but it was significant to her. And nothing would have happened had they not drug her out by her hair and arrested her. It probably just would have happened. But instead, they paid $500,000 to her, and an additional, I believe it was another $900,000, went for court costs and attorney fees. So I don't think the courts care how big you are. Great Falls, you know, not that they want to absorb that, but they could probably access that, what is it, $1 million easier than the Frenchtown Fire District. But I don't think the courts care when it comes to people's constitutional rights. If that's the marker on the table, that's the starting point. So not to scare you and have you think, oh gosh, what am I doing? Why do I want to do this? But to realize that this is important, what we're doing. We're facilitating this public process. So following the rules is really important. The public is pretty canny about knowing what their rights are, and they'll let you know. Go ahead, Chris. I have another story that we can talk about, but I'm running out of time, but I'm loving this. Go ahead.
I want to throw one thing out. You have some reports here. You have access to the county attorney's office, right? So there are attorneys assigned. Dan, I don't have your microphone and I'm getting.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. You're getting stink eye from. Oh yeah. So
Sorry about that. So what I was saying is that all of the boards in Missoula County have access to the county attorney's office as part of that. So if you have a question, it's worth the quick phone call versus the $1.4 million number that Dan just put up on the board.
I love to say when people ask questions, why don't you seek competent legal counsel on that one? I have opinions, but I'm not an attorney. And oftentimes those attorneys will give you an opinion, but they say, this is where I think the line is, and I feel comfortable defending that in court. Yeah. Oh, just push that little button there.
I was just wondering, what's that called when you submit a question to the Attorney
The Attorney
General or to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court, that's going to be through a lawsuit. So somebody sues you and it goes through district court and then it's appealed up to Supreme Court. To the court, access to the court. The only other way to access the Attorney General is through the city or county attorneys. They have standing to ask those questions. So it might be that your board is working on something. It's like, oh, there's the law really isn't clear here, right? Whatever's coming out of this next legislative session, there's likely some ambiguous language in there. It's like, oh. And if we're a affordable housing organization that's trying to tap into the new affordable housing, whatever, then they could ask, hey, county attorney, as we're trying to implement this new law, we're not sure how this works. This language seems to be whatever. Could you ask the Attorney General for an opinion? Yeah. We're good? No, over here.
Just to make sure I understand this, if a 5-person board and you're going to send 2 of them off to investigate something, those 2 are a quorum in themselves, right?
No.
Is that what you're saying? No.
That's what that board does by policy. That's how their standard is, that if any of us get together, we want to record that and make sure that that's part of the record and informing the rest of the board of what happened. In your case with Frenchtown, that's probably not your policy. So your quorum would be 3 members of your 5-member board. Anytime 3 get together, that's having a meeting. So then and you're 3 together that are doing one of these 3 things.
Okay, but if 2 are doing one of those 3 things, no.
You're okay.
No.
Legally.
And then they take those 2, take it to the
Third.
full board,
Yeah.
the full 5,
Okay.
and they have already made the decision. We might discuss it. Is that right?
Well, yeah, because if they're bringing it to the full board, then it's going to be on an agenda. The public can come and participate and weigh in on it. But then you debate. Yeah, that's how a lot of decisions are made, right? You have a chief, right? So it might be a board member and the chief are sitting down. We're going to go out and investigate this thing. We're going to solve this problem and come back with a recommendation to the board. Yeah, one of the things I want you to be thinking about too, which is approaching violating the open meeting law, is if the 2 of you are talking, that's not a problem. But then you say, okay, what's your name? Leanna. So, and Greg. So Greg and Leanna are talking, and then Greg says, okay, I kind of know where Leanna's at. So now I'm going to go to Matt. And they say, hey, Leanna and I think this. What do you think? And then I'm going to go to Steve. Hey, Leanna and Steve and I, we think this, or Matt, thank you for keeping me straight. Right. So what we're doing is we're circumventing the open meeting law by shopping around. The courts call that a walking meeting. So Dylan got stung with this. That's the chair of the city council in the city of Dillon. They were having heartburn. The city council and the executive branch, the mayor, were having a disagreement. And the chair of the board of the council wrote a letter, this letter about whatever this public works project was that they weren't happy with. And then went to each council member and said, hey, read this letter. If you agree with it, sign it. Oh yeah, I agree with that. They sign it. Go to the next, read this letter. If you agree with it, sign it. He went to 7, or all the council members, 5 of the 7 signed it and then presented it at a city council meeting. And the mayor's like, oh, this is interesting. When you're done reading that letter, I'd like to have a copy because that will be Exhibit A in our lawsuit. Because he said, when did you have this discussion? I don't recall having this letter on an agenda where you all agreed to what it had to say. And so they ended up suing, the executive branch sued the legislative branch, and 5 of the 7 members were removed from office for violating the open meeting law, and it was official misconduct is what they violated, the official misconduct laws of the state. So trick is while you're here, you're figuring out, oh, there's a lane I need to be in. I need to follow the lane, be in my lane. If I get out of the lane, not good things happen. Oh, dang it. Mm. Yeah. Correct. Thank you. And so if you have 2 members that are just loosely talking, that's one thing. If you said, hey, we want, as an official act of the board saying, we want the 2 of you to talk about this and come up with a solution or recommendation back to us. What you've created then is you're taking action saying, we want you to act on our behalf. Now you've just created a subdivision of government, which then would have to have those meetings open. Now, if it's just 2 of you met at the bar and said, hey, you know, we ought to do, you know, and you start chit-chatting about this and come up with some recommendation, then you roll it up to the board, that's a little bit of a different scenario. And you're right, the chief, and so now if you say, hey, I want the 2 of you and the chief to have this conversation, that's going to be another subdivision of government that those meetings have to be noticed.
I'll get specific here. 2 members chosen to negotiate a contract.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question, Dan?
2 members are assigned to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement with the firefighters union. I don't like that. I would much rather have the chief do it. That's more of an executive function than it is a legislative function. What you're having is the board, all of you all on boards are the legislative branch of government. You create policies. The chief is the executive in your case. So they're the executive branch where they are taking the policies adopted by the district or by the board and implementing them. So I think it would be more appropriate for the chief, who has certain authorities as the executive branch, to then engage in negotiation and bring that collective bargaining agreement back to the board for their approval. That would be more consistent with the roles and responsibilities of the board versus the executive branch. So if you've asked 2 board members to negotiate that agreement, I will say this, that collective bargaining agreement negotiations are not to be closed or done in an executive session. Does that make sense? So there are certain times that you can close a public meeting and go into an executive session or a closed meeting, and that's when you're talking about someone's privacy right. The law used to say you can also close a meeting for collective bargaining, and it still says you can close a meeting to discuss litigation strategy in a lawsuit. So those are the 2 exceptions. Lawsuit, privacy issue, you can close the meeting and have that conversation. Collective bargaining is out in the open. So in this case, so I'm just thinking it through, if you're asking 2, you're creating a group with a purpose, working as responsible to the board, yeah, then that you'd probably need to open those meetings, that would be a meeting. That's why oftentimes the mayor negotiates it or the chief would negotiate it, because then they're not a governing body. So.
Which, if it is an open meeting, then it would also need to have minutes taken of the negotiation.
Yeah. If the mayor did it, or I'm sorry, if the chief did it, they would just go through the negotiation. They wouldn't have the same formality and expectation. Wow, this is a different, well, the same formality and expectation as the legislative body would. Yeah. So that's typically why it's kicked over to the executive, because they have more latitude. Anytime the governing body gets together, so there's a good case law from the Supreme Court that there was the newspaper wanted to attend a meeting between the mayor, public works director, and the engineer of the city, because they were talking about a public works project. And they sued the city saying, we want to have access to those meetings. And the lawsuit the city or the newspaper editor lost in that lawsuit, saying they are not the governing body of the city. The public has a right to see the sausage being made for the governing body. So the legislative branch is the one that's transparent. This is an administrative meeting of the city conducting. The decision to have the public works was already done at the council meeting. Now it's how do we implement it? And that's what the meeting is about. So they didn't have access to that. Does that make sense? They're not a legislative body. It's the governing body that has the responsibility of being open to the public. Little nuancy things. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. Good for you guys on top of this.
Just because everybody here is involved in a governing body, I'm concerned if there's a circumstance under which people who are members of a governing body can think and have conversations without having an open meeting. That seems to be the paralyzing feature of being a board member. And I think there are ways, but I'd be interested in your comment on that. You've given some examples, but how can people who have that responsibility of being on a governing board do work that's germane to the organization without a public meeting? Or can they?
Yeah, so I would say they can't. Their purpose is to facilitate for the public good. And so by meeting separately without the public, then it's my good. It's what do I want rather than how do I facilitate what the public needs. So lean into the glacier speed of it. It's slow and cumbersome. And so if you have a 12-member board, how big is your board? Probably big. Yeah. 12-member board. So 3 of you go out and have coffee and you start grinding through this stuff, right? And then you come back and try to influence the board. You can do that kind of work. Yeah. Yeah, and I would just make sure that the board doesn't officially recognize them as a working group. Those, if we say, hey, we want you to work on this project, well, now we've been assigned something to work on behalf of the board to facilitate this conversation. Back to what that number 6 said. Oh my gosh. Right? Any committee or subcommittee appointed by the public body for the purpose of conducting business that is within the jurisdiction of that agency. So they're even asking you as a small subcommittee to go, we want you to grind over this particular issue, this nuancy issue over here. They've asked you to do that. That's an official act of the board. Now your little subgroup has become another governing body that has to follow these same rules here. Yeah. And again, just follow your policy, post your meetings, have it at the, such and such a place, and just do your meeting. What's the likelihood the public's going to show up? Maybe, maybe not. But you keep doing the work, and it gives you that defensibility that when you come back with your recommendation, the public's not saying, whoa, 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 I didn't know anything about this. And you say, well, we went through and followed our policy. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, sorry. So what about, I'm not
Basically
framing an issue and bringing
framing an issue to bring to the public meeting by a group, a working group, or a group of people who happen to be board members.
Yeah, so if it's an informal and you're not a quorum and you haven't been officially assigned by the board to act on their behalf, then it's just 3-4 people coming together talking about a public issue, but you're not, then that I don't have a problem with. Yeah, if you're officially saying, hey, we're tasking you to do this thing on our behalf and come back and report. So the beauty of all this is you just say, oh, I've learned something today, so how am I going to change my behavior moving forward? There was a wonderful case in here in Missoula County years ago, I don't know how many years, that they were arguing over extending benefits to domestic partners. And it's a big deal, right? Apparently lots of meetings, lots of hearings, the letters to the editor, op-eds. It was a big public conversation. And when it came time for the commission to make that final action and decide one way or the other, apparently they didn't notice it 48 hours before the meeting. Whoops. They went ahead and had the meeting anyway. They were sued by the side that didn't prevail on that public debate. And they lost. Why? Because the judge said, this has been vetted in the community for 6 months. You've been talking about it. It's not that people weren't, so you need adequate notice prior to final action. They said, there has been 6 months of notice. You knew the decision was coming. And on top of that, those of you, it might be in the room here, I gotta be careful. Those of you that are suing were at the meeting and made public comment. So you can't argue the fact that you didn't know because they didn't notice it by 48 hours. You're just trying to find some sort of procedural hiccup that you're gonna be able to unravel that decision. And we're not buying it. We're not buying it. You were there, you commented, you lost. And what you're trying to do is reverse the decision. Yeah, they didn't probably do it right, but the court said, irrespective of not doing that procedural thing, the process was honored. We had lots of conversation with the public and we knew it was coming. I wouldn't suggest you play that game, right? So make sure it's noticed properly. It was before your watch, right? Not on your watch. So I always get a kick about that. I always hate talking about it because it's that 48 hours. I want you to notice it 48 hours, but it's also what we're finding more and more is that the public, when we engage in a public conversation and a debate, chickens or no chickens, what they'll end up saying is, hey, I didn't want chickens, but the city went with chickens. So I'm going to look at every little procedural thing you did from the beginning of time until now. And if you didn't notice it properly, you didn't have the right minutes approved, you didn't do something. If you didn't do some little thing, I'm going to use that as my excuse to unravel the whole decision. I'll call them procedure hawks. So it's in your best interest to say, look, we have a policy. We're going to follow the policy consistently. That way we're defensible if someone wants to push back. And there's nothing for them to push back on. You lost the public conversation. And that's okay. That's how the system's designed. The majority is going to rule. And if you don't like that, sharpen your pencil, refine your argument, get back in the public square, and start arguing better and more effectively for your side. And maybe you might sway it in the future. Right? But don't grab a legislator and say, hey, go to Helena and fix it for me. I lost in Missoula. Go to Helena and now have the legislature fix it for us. Did I say that out loud? Is that inaccurate? All right. Anything else on this? All right, we've got a half hour. How much of my list did we get done so far? We doing well here? Nothing? Nothing's done? Has this been helpful so far though? All right. Okay, so open meetings. Think we got that covered? Ad nauseum. Okay, that's done. Informal discussions. Feel like that's covered? Ooh, we're doing progress here. What's this other one? Enforcement. Ooh, bad actors. Let's talk about that one. Planning, strategic plans. Let's talk about that for a second. Your groups, right? Some of you've got boards that are being created. And I think you only have so much volunteer time that you can dedicate to public service. I get that. I can give you like 6 hours a month, 8 hours a month tops, right? 2 hours for a meeting. I've got prep time. I've got post time. That's what I can give you. I think if a board were to sit down and figure out what is it that we're doing, what is our objectives, what are we trying to accomplish over the next 3 years, it makes those meetings far more productive and effective. And you're leveraging your volunteer time in a far more efficient way, right? It's already inconvenient. Let's not compound that where we show up at a meeting and say, well, what do we want to talk about today? Oh my gosh, right? But if we had a strategic plan, that strategic plan can serve as what are we going to use or put in our agenda? What are we going to talk about to further our plans and our objectives and our goals? And that provides support to staff, your staff member, right? So, so the staff can be working and say, yeah, we know. So our work at the county or the city can be leveraged, on the staff time can be leveraged for an overall outcome. And ideally, what's great is if we have a county or a city here's our overarching strategic plan, and here's the things we're trying to accomplish. And then the departments have their strategic plans of how we're going to meet the county's overall strategic plan. And then all the boards that are supporting that department can be part of that strategic planning process. So we have the whole apparatus is working in unison to some sort of a greater outcome and good. So, and then the other thing to say is that these policies are pretty critical too. How do we spend, if we have good policies that guide us, then we don't spend as much time fighting over process. You make the decision about how we make decisions and then follow that process. So you're not reinventing it every meeting. That's why I say people don't govern, policies govern. You create good policies and then we just follow those policies through the decision-making process. There's so much energy spent in this state in local government fighting over process at the sacrifice of good decisions being made at the outcome, at the end. And that's been my work over the last 15 years, is trying to help local governments figure out how do we create a good structure and framework to operate in so my volunteer time can be leveraged for the outcome. I'm passionate about affordable housing, and I want to spend my time working on affordable housing issues, not fighting over how we're going to make decisions about affordable housing. Right? That doesn't inspire me. And I am going to walk away from this because I am not moving my interests any further because we're just talking about process. Now, it might take a new board, right? You guys, it might take, if you get on this Clinton Community Council, some time to get set up and try to get that framework. But once you get that figured out, you can get humming right along. You have standard boilerplate bylaws for everybody or just community councils? Okay. Great. Woohoo! So I have in our packet, we have a section, I think it's in the right-hand side, I think. It's called Rules of Procedure. Now, your bylaws don't extend to special districts, do they? Okay, so those boards that are appointed by the commission or by does the city have a similar bylaws? So the boards that are appointed by the city council or the county commission, they operate with a boilerplate set of bylaws that are already adopted by the city or the county for all their boards. Now, the exception is special districts. So if they have a fire district, you don't have that benefit. Now, you could take that as a framework and say, we're going to use it because, hey, they're smart people. They've got a good framework. Why reinvent the wheel? Another option is, what did I say? R3 is we sat down and wrote this little 8-page boilerplate rules of procedure. So what you could do is say, okay, our Frenchtown rules of procedure or bylaws, put them next to this template and just read through and say, is there something in our template that we don't have in our bylaws that would make sense to migrate into our bylaws? There may be something we thought of that you didn't that will make it better for us by adopting this new additional item. So if you don't have them, that would be a good starting point. If you do have them, then you can use that as a aid to make yours better. We tried to look at what would be the minimum you'd have to have in your bylaws to satisfy the law, or at least to maintain some semblance of good governance. And that's that set of bylaws there. Fortunately, the county or the city is already, for most of you, has already taken care of that. So you don't have to spend a lot of energy debating bylaws. That's the most soul-sucking thing to ever do. We look at a lot of organizations' bylaws and help them think that through. It's soul-sucking, and it takes a tremendous amount of energy for any board to stand that stuff up, to get that stuff put together. But once you do, it makes all that subsequent work so much more efficient and effective. It's just a hassle. So that's why most boards, fortunately, you've got it done, but most, they don't make that effort. And so they're always spinning their wheels, arguing over process. Okay, enough said there. I like to talk too much, don't I? All right. Planning, we caught that. Governing versus management, do we want to talk more about that? You've said enough, Dan. Move on. But I think on that management part, some of it too is then how do we, the management can be, if you want to think about process, what are our policies and things that help with that, with the process, the management part of it. I don't know if that helps, but I look at governing as that philosophy. How do we approach the big picture? How do we think about this, the fulcrum and the balance? How do I see myself as that facilitator? And then I see the management as, okay, we have all these rules and bylaws that help me define my role. I have a clear defined lane, delineators on one side, rumble strip on the other side. When I start hitting delineators or rumbling on the rumble strip, I know, ooh, I got to get back in my lane. And I think that's where the management comes in, is defining what our lane is as a board or what my lane is as a board member. What's my relationship with staff? We've got another large metro community in the state right now that's having a meltdown with some of their boards, and they've just gone overboard and they're directing staff. They're insistent. They're like petulant children, you know, thinking we are here and why is the council, the city council, not adopting our budget? Did you just say that? That's kind of bold, you know, so that they've inappropriately are seeing outsizing their role in the city. Rather than being advisory to the council, they feel like, no, the council needs to do our bidding and the staff needs to do our bidding because our work is super important. So they've kind of lost sight of what their role is and how they're supporting the system. And so that it creates a lot of static in the organization. Yeah.
I think that was my point, having been in both governance managers.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them get there by the fact that they own good companies, they know how to manage their own. They don't govern, they manage.
Yeah, that's a real challenge. Like with city council with the city manager, yeah, they'll want to manage staff. The law says you can't. So understanding your altitude as a board, you're up here making decisions. Here's another thing to think about. As a board member, as an individual board member, what power do you have? Yeah. Yes.
Can you repeat that, please?
Your advisor. So as an individual board member, you have no power. As an individual, I can't, as an individual, direct staff. I can't make a recommendation as an individual board member. My power comes when our board is meeting in this environment and we make a decision and a majority makes that decision. That's the power I have, is a vote. Separate myself from this context. Now I'm just a regular citizen. So if I show up trying to direct staff as an individual, if I was a staff member, I'd say, well, is that in the form of a motion? It means I don't work for you, but I work for the board. And if the board wants to have this thing done, well, you need to meet, you need to debate it, have the public weigh in, make a decision. And if it's something within the scope of work, then I will consider doing that or not, right? Understanding that relationship. Or if you get a newly elected city council member that's a captain of industry, comes in and starts directing staff, it's like, no, you're out of your lane. We have a manager that does that, or a chief executive, or a chief CAO, chief administrative officer. You don't start directing staff, right? The manager directs the staff. You make the policy decisions. That's your altitude and that's your lane, stick in your lane, right? So anyway, is that good? Does that make sense? Understanding your lane. What we didn't talk about is liability up here. I hope I haven't freaked you all out about liability, but we'll talk about that if we need to. What was this one? Oh, the campaigning. So the conflict of interest, campaigning, you've got time. In your packet, it's going to be on the left-hand side, Code of Ethics, R9 or L9. L9. And again, if we go back to our model, we have in our Constitution, right? Our Constitution says the legislature shall create code of ethics that prohibits the conflict between your private interest and your public duty, something to that effect. Does that sound right? So we recognize the fact that all y'all are coming to the table, right? Coming to public service with a private interest. You own businesses, you have assets, resources, you have family, you have with you a whole bunch of private personal interests. Now you're in a position to facilitate on behalf of the public good. And we recognize the fact that there may be times where your public service will be in conflict with your private interest. And in that case, we want to say there is a conflict of interests here, and we've created a pathway for you to navigate, to remove yourself from that public, that conflict, and so that we're serving the public. Does that make sense? Turn to page L10 22103. I'm a super nerd, not just a regular nerd, but a super nerd because I have favorite statutes in the MCA. Find anyone else that has that. I challenge you to find anyone that has a, do you have a favorite statute? Chris does not, see? Super nerd, right here, super nerd. I got a badge. There's a membership of one. All right, so this is my favorite. It says the holding of public officer employment is a public trust created by the confidence that the electorate reposes in the integrity of public officers, legislators, and public employees. A public officer or legislator or public employee shall carry out the individual's duties for the benefit of the people of the state. Public officer or public employee whose conduct departs from that person's duty, public duty, is liable to the people of the state and is subject to penalties provided in this part for abuse of the public's trust. So this statute really talks about there's an implied trust by virtue of you stepping into the public arena saying, I'm going to facilitate on behalf of the public good. The public then is going to extend the level of trust to you, that we're going to trust that you're going to act in the best interest of the public. And if you violate that trust, that's a big deal. This statute has penalties that is fines and jail time associated with violating this code of ethics. So if you're using your position of power to enrich yourself, to take advantage of your influence or your access to resources for your own benefit, that's going to be a violation of the trust, and then the bad things happen. Does that make sense? Want some stories? So there's a county commissioner. Here's a situation where a county commissioner owns a plane with two other individuals. So three of them jointly own an airplane, and it's housed up at the city county airport. There is a district or an area that is considered the airport area where airport operations happen within this geographic boundary. It's zoned that way, and it's county zoned. And these two of these individuals, not the county commissioner, but his two buddies who he owns the plane with, purchased 20 acres adjacent to the zone that's zoned for the airport and wants to turn that into a fixed-based operation for helicopters, an FBO for helicopters. It's where they fix and repair helicopters. And in order to get all the tax benefits and all that stuff, they want to have that 20 acres annexed into that zone. So you see where I'm going with this. So I have a business, he has a business relationship with them. And now those two have created another business over here and are going to come before the county to ask for a change of zoning. So as soon as he learned of this happening, he thought, ding, 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 ding. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm not sure where I stand relative to my position and my relationship with them and their proposed business opportunity. I have no interest in their business. It's not, I have nothing to do with it. My only connection with them is the ownership of this plane. So he immediately got out of his chair, walked down the hall to the county attorney's office, and he sat down and said, okay, attorney, this is going on. These dudes are going to come before me asking for a change of zoning for this project. And so they sat down and picked point by point, what's the relationship? Is there a financial interest? All that stuff. They went through the law, the code, and looked at their specific situation and determined, is there a conflict of interest here or not? So it's a legal determination whether there's a conflict of interest. And it was determined, no, this scenario does not create a legally defined conflict of interest, and that you should be able to make a decision on this issue without recusing yourself. However, I advise you, every time this comes up on the agenda, declare to the public, I have a relationship with these two gentlemen. My relationship extends only to the ownership of an airplane. I have no financial or personal interest in what's being proposed that's coming before us. And I can dispassionately discharge my duties as a county commissioner, make a decision on this without being unduly influenced, something to that effect. He had some sort of a language that the county attorney crafted for him. And so he read that statement every time it came up. Now the Billings Gazette, we've talked about before, they like to watch what's going on. This was snooze fest for them. They got no interest, no traction, no one cared. Why? Because he rolled out at the very beginning, declared this relationship, and that's been legally reviewed, there's no conflict, and I will continue working on this until the end. So when they made that final decision, no big deal. Now, if he had never done any of that, He makes the decision, thinking in his own head there's no conflict, which he's right, but not disclosing I have a relationship. If he had made that decision and then the Billings Gazette finds out, how would that have turned out? Oh yeah, we're selling some papers today, right? And there's no violation of the law. It's just that transparency and openness, and it would have really taken a hit on the public's trust. It wasn't illegal. It just wasn't handled really well. So kudos to that commissioner for recognizing, hey, I'm going to get out ahead of this. I'm going to manage this process rather than, just any day, just look at the headlines and you can see these conflicts of interest playing out right now. I'll just let that sit, right? So disclosing is pretty important. And if you're disclosing up front and being perfectly honest about it, then yeah, we get it. We understand these things are part of life, and we get that. We'll still provide the trust to you. You try to hide it or think, oh, I don't think that's that important. I don't think it's of significant interest to the public. We'll let the public decide what's that significant for them. Go ahead.
My question is, let's say the county attorney said, this is a conflict of interest. Then what does the county commissioner do?
So if there was, say he had a percentage ownership of this proposed FBO, and he said, so yeah, I have a financial interest. He says, okay, now you have a conflict of interest. You need to declare that conflict and then recuse yourself from participating in the decision-making process. So it's a legally defined, yes, there is a conflict and there's a process for you to extricate yourself from the process. Now, there may be situations, rare situations, where you find yourself as a governing body or as a member of a governing body that has to participate in the decision and you have a conflict. Okay, so if you turn the page to L12, 13, 2-131, 2-131, and that's the disclosure section, where you disclose, I have a conflict of interest. You have a public hearing where you describe to the public, here's the situation that is facing us, here is my conflict, and I'm disclosing to you my conflict of interest relative to this decision. We're allow the public to weigh in on that in the hearing. You'll write send a disclosure to the Commissioner of Political Practice declaring that I have a conflict of interest, and they'll file that and they'll be watching from Helena what's going on. And then after doing all that, then you have the meeting. You again disclose that I have a conflict, but in spite of that, I can still make this decision without being improperly influenced and make the decision. Rare that happens, but there's been a few times in the last 15 years that we've worked with city attorneys to work through this. We just had one not long ago where a bank president is on the planning board and a subdivision is, or a development is coming before the planning board for their review, that their financing is going through their bank. They're not getting personally enriched by it. They still have a salary. Their salary is their salary, right? So I'm not getting richer for it. It's supporting my company, so it's enough of that gray that they're saying, you know what, I need to disclose to the public that I have a conflict of interest. And so in collaboration with the attorney, they're trying to decide, do they need to do the formal disclosure as 2-131 says, where we have the hearing and send the form to the Commissioner of Political Practice, or is it just enough to say, look, we're providing the financing for this project, but in no way am I personally being enriched by it, and I can make a decision without being influenced by this. Really, they didn't want to participate because they didn't like the person, and they're mean and terrible people, and if they all wanted to say no, but they're afraid of the retaliation, so they're all scrambling to find ways to recuse themselves from being on the board to make this decision. 5-member board, 3 of them found ways to disqualify themselves. And so they got 2 people left trying to make this decision, and this banker was one of them. Yeah. So they're able to muscle one back into the loop to make it 3-member, and they declined it. And they said, yeah, we've been feeling the wrath of this individual ever since. Great question. And that's where I would say, anytime you have a question about a potential conflict, connect with legal counsel. Work with them to navigate that. They may say, this is at such a level, when this comes up on the agenda, we would like you to remove yourself from the very room. We don't want you to have any influence where you're sighing, rolling your eyes, or nodding your head or whatever. We don't want to have that kind of language, body language going on. So just take yourself out. Or maybe something where they say, just sit there, be quiet and take care of it, you know. Yeah. So I think some of it, the attorneys help you guide that at what level. Another scenario, want to hear a quick another scenario? We got, what do we have here? Now I don't remember the scenario. Phew, gone. So, oh, now about the election stuff. So if you look, so just, well, really quickly, L12, 22121. This is one of those things where it says, you know, this using public resources for your own benefit. So it's the flip of this. Oh, now I remember this. I'll come back to it. A public officer or public employee may not, subject to subsection 7, use public time, facilities, equipment, supplies, personnel, or funds for the officer or employee's private business purpose. So you can't, if this is not your little piggy bank or your little resource center to say, hey, I've got access to this, to the county's chainsaw. I'm going to take the chainsaw on the weekend and I'm going to go to my neighbors and I'm going to cut down their tree and they're going to pay me $50 to buck up their tree, right? So I'm using public resources for my personal private interest. There's actually a definition of what they, words mean something in the law, by the way, and usually the legislature tries to define when we use this word, it has a meaning. So throughout this section of the law, when they use business purpose, this is what they mean. So turn to page L9. And it defines a business to include a corporation, partnership, sole proprietorship, trust, or foundation, or any other individual or organization carrying on a business, whether or not operated for a profit. So you don't even have to make money to be considered a business purpose, right? So if you're using these public assets for your own personal gain, whether or not you're trying to make a profit on it, that's a violation of the Code of Ethics. And it's the same with the election part of it. You can't use, and I think that's in, yeah, I think it's in that same 22121. Yeah, 22121, back to that page L12. That same section about halfway down, it says in number 3, subsection 3, the public officer or public employee may not use public time, facilities, equipment, supplies, personnel, or funds to solicit support for or opposition to any political committee, the nomination or election of any person or public officer, or the passage of a ballot issue unless, and it has a list of exceptions. And if you look down at the next highlighted one on C, it says this subsection is not intended to restrict the right of public officer or public employee to express personal political views. It's just the using of public assets and resources to do that is the violation. So just because you're a member of a board or you're on a committee or you're an elected official or a city employee, you don't lose your ability, your First Amendment right to participate in the political process. Thing is, you just can't use, you know, I'm going to use the city or the county's copy machine to make a whole bunch of flyers in support of a proposition or an election or whatever. That would be inappropriate. But outside of my, you know, if I'm the fire chief, I'm taking my uniform off. I'm not going to go around and campaign in my uniform because now I'm illicit. It even talks about that. Remember that a while back with Schweitzer? He had some public service announcements with the captain of the highway patrol and did some public service announcements while campaign season, right? So doing what they're supposed to do, public service announcements, but you're also getting FaceTime, public resources being used. So it just, people said, we're not sure we like that. We're not sure this is okay. So we went back and thought about it, and the legislature came up and said, okay, let's provide some guidance for people that have uniforms or they're evoking this position of power or authority in this particular way. And so they've had some clarity in the law in that section there. Does that help? So this whole section deals with, you can't use private information or confidential information you learn in the operation of your board service and use that for your own personal private gain. You're on the planning board. and you know that their town pump is proposing to put a new town pump on a corner. Pick any corner in Montana, they're likely interested in putting a town pump there, by the way. I say that jestingly because they're like all over Bozeman. So they want to put a town pump there. So you know that, no one else knows that because you're on the planning board and you're kind of privy to this information before it's become public. And you know, right next door to that lot is a vacant lot that's sitting there. Nobody can sell it. It's just, you know, ooh, once the town pump goes in, maybe that lot might increase in value. So if I go out and quickly have my wife buy that for us, and then when they announce it, the price or value of that lot goes up. So I'm using that information for my own personal gain. Is that a good example? All right. It's 6 o'clock. Did we get through it all? You can ask many, oh, we didn't do enforcing. Oh, I'll talk about that. Yes. Oh, let's do this. Yeah. Oh, did we turn it on? Is this the one? Oh, let's swap.
The outcome of behaving badly as a board member or as a board is getting sued by the public or somebody, or I guess my question is there some other enforcement or oversight?
Yeah. So some of your boards that are appointed and there's a member of your board that is acting inappropriately, right there. And this happens. And we want to be clear that we've got a board member that doesn't agree with the rest of us. And that's a real pain in the butt. And we're tired of hearing them. That's not a reason to get rid of them for their views. We want that. We want to embrace that and lean into that. We want the diversity of thought and ideas to be generated here and make the best decision. We want to have that representation in our conversation. So that's not a bad thing. But if they're acting inappropriate, they're yelling, they're throwing things, they're stomping around, they're talking to staff, you know, that kind of behavior, that you can say, well, okay, if we're all appointed by the commission, we can't bounce them because we didn't appoint them. But if we go back to the commission and say, hey, we've got a bad actor here that's acting inappropriate and creating a liability for us and for you, and we have made a no confidence vote in this individual because of their behavior, not because of their views, but because their behavior. And does that sound appropriate? Would you say, okay, we'll take that under advisement and try to take action on it because we don't want to have inappropriate behavior taking place by a board member that can bring liability both to the board and to the county. So that could be a vote of no confidence for an individual in their behavior. Special district boards, the legislature just passed a law saying if your board isn't noticing your meetings or isn't allowing public comment or refusing to give minutes out, right, just being a bad actor, or just flat out refusing not to meet, the public now with this law, I think it passed, it's like 5% of the membership of that district or 5 members, whatever's lowest, something like that. I'm not sure what the language is now. I weighed in back in the interim. But anyway, they can sign a petition, deliver it to the county attorney. I think this is the flow, or the commission. The commission refers it to the county attorney, and the county attorney does an investigation. Is there any merit to this claim of being bad actors? If there's merit to the claim, they then sick us on them. The law says they need to have training from the local government center. No funds along with that. So now we're running around being enforcers without additional funds. But anyway, so then they have to pay for us to come out and provide training for them. And if they continue, after that training, if they continue acting bad and not following the law, after we threaten them with $1.4 million or whatever, right? Get them all scared and they say, hey, I'm going to get scared straight. If they still continue being bad actors, then the county commission, I believe, can remove them from office and reappoint a new board. That wasn't the case before. The only option before with a special district like you would be for, where am I at here? The recall. Voters could recall you or sue you for not following the law. And the court would say, you've got to follow the law. So that's kind of a high bar. If in order for you to force you to do your job, what we elected you to do, is to have to go to the district court and sue you to say, you need to notice your meetings. That's a high, so first of all, just do your job, you know, with good intent, do the best you can to follow the law when conducting your business. But yeah, so that's That was what it was there before. You could either sue them and make them accountable through the court system or to recall them, both of which are high bars. And so the legislature said, look, let's make this a little easier. And so we're going to do this method where we're going to, first with the carrot, here's some education. Maybe you're acting this way because you just don't know any better. We're going to make that generous assumption. And after the training, you continue to act bad. Now it's no longer a lack of information. You're being willful and intentionally not following the law. Now you're a liability to the people of the state, and we're going to remove you. Yeah, it's good. It's helpful to have policies also defining what are our expectations for behavior. So if you're violating those expectations of behavior, it gives you an ability to go to the county and say, hey, county, here's our standards. They're not following these standards, and they're creating a problem. Yeah. Is that good? Anything else from the folks online? They're probably cooking dinner, eating, enjoying life, sitting out on the back deck. And here we are, stuck in here, eating granola bars, which are great, by the way. So, all right. Well, thank you for your time. I hope this has been helpful and we've met some of your needs. On the back of that folder is our website. All these handouts can be found there. So if there's people on your board that weren't able to make it today and you want to say, hey, it's great training, you can refer them to that website and they can find those same packet of information. We also can come out and do training specific for your board if you need. Again, we do a fee for service. The legislature gives us a little bit of money and they say, ask the local governments to make up the difference. And so that's why we do fee for service. So, so if you feel that's a need for us to come out and do some training, well, we're happy to do that, do some facilitating public process or strategic planning, we can do that for you as well. We'll just slap you on the calendar and show up. So anything else for the good of the order before we release the hounds? Well, thank